I felt I was out of grace. And I woke up on a Saturday morning in May in 2018, and I was $100 overdraft. I had $20 in my pocket, so I was like negative $80. I was terribly deep in debt. I had enough food to last the day, and I hadn't worked in a few weeks. I couldn't get arrested for one of the 6 or 7 different jobs I had been juggling to try to keep myself afloat. And I was out of options. I was out of luck. I was out of options. I felt I was out of grace. And so I did what anybody who has a faith in God does. In my position, I literally got on my knees and just cried out to God. And I just was upset with God. And I'm like, how do you let me get to this point? You know, like, I've done everything I thought I was supposed to do, and you haven't shown me any other roads. So, I just started quoting scripture. I said, you know what, Lord? You said, come to me all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So here's mine. Yeah. As I surrender, man. I surrender. And I feel like the key for me was saying it out loud, hearing it out loud.
The key for me was hearing it out loud, saying it out loud. Oh my goodness, right there we get to see Jonathan's Jesus moment himself, prior to him being this beautiful representation of Jesus for the world today. He himself experienced this grand moment of surrender. Oh, welcome back to Through the Lens. Today we are diving deep into Jonathan and Jesus, the Amazon Prime special, and oh my goodness. This is chapter 4, so this is literally the final episode in it, and I think it is the most packed with just beauty and miracles and surrender and trust, and just a real representation of Jonathan's own journey to becoming Jesus, and how he, they talk about actors and actresses all the time, and you see in this series that in fact they do have to do all this work, and they have to do all of this shedding to really become the character, to really step into that character. And what better way to step into the character of Jesus by full surrender yourself? I think a key thing right here that Jonathan shares with us is that he got to this point of, he only had, he was negative $80. He had a overdraft of $100 in his account, and he only had $20 in his pocket, which my mind goes to the song PS starts playing in my head. I got $20 in my pocket. Anyway, side note. So he's at this moment of complete back against the wall. Nothing is coming through. And he says, I do what most, I think he says, Christians do, or people that believe in God. And I get down on my knees and essentially yell at God. I essentially ask God, what in the F? And he says, I've done everything. I have done everything I thought I was supposed to. And I think right there, to me, my light goes on. I have done everything I thought I was supposed to. You thought that was your biggest problem, is that it was you were trying to run the show. And in that moment, Jonathan says, I had to speak it out loud that I surrender, because what we keep in the dark, we do not hand over to spirit. So really what I hear Jonathan saying and realizing is that for that entire time, he was attempting to be in control. He was attempting to keep in the darkness his need to control what was outside. In the moment he got down on his knees and surrendered, the moment he surrendered out loud is the moment he actually handed it over to God. He actually handed it over to Spirit and said, the famous saying, Jesus, take the wheel. And I know if we, I would love to have a conversation with Jonathan about this even more, because I'm guessing he felt up until that point that he truly was allowing Jesus and allowing God to guide his way. And yes, maybe there were moments, but never, ever does God wish for you to stay in the desert. Ever. I know we have been trained to believe that we must sit in this place of sacrifice and separation in order to be worthy of the love of God, but that is like the biggest vice that keeps us stuck. In A Course in Miracles, at one point, Helen asked Jesus, what do we do in the desert? Right? What do we do in that time where it feels like there is nothing? And he says, you leave the desert, right? Like, and my words aren't exact, but essentially he's like, leave the desert. Why in your right mind would you stay in the desert? And that is so true. And I think for so long, Jonathan stayed in the desert. And he didn't realize that the entire time he was in control of this. He was the one choosing to stay in the desert. He was the one choosing to try to figure it out, to try to do what he thought he was supposed to do. When I think one of our biggest mistakes is like thinking we know. We know nothing. Like recently I've shared, we did the exercise in the Lighthouse Academy that David Hoffmeister does around the I know mind. You know nothing. You don't know what's best for you. You know nothing. We believe our happiness is located in all these illusionary things. And that's also what Jonathan was kind of sharing in this moment, is that he got to a place of surrender because he was so fearful, right? Like, we only get to surrender out of a place of fear. Because he didn't think he was going to have any money to eat, to pay his bills, to live, to survive. When in fact, that's not where it was. It never was there. But yes, the moment he surrendered and was just like my moment, I have a video of myself as well, which is interesting because we see now Jonathan then goes home later that day and the tides turn. Like, 100% 180, like my favorite thing of rewind, like everything just shifts so crazy for him, but it's not crazy, it's beautiful because it's a representation of his surrender. And I think today we have like this misconception of what surrender is, and it's like, we surrender to receive. That is not surrender. That is you still believing you know what will make you happy, where your happiness is contained, what this journey is actually about. I just keep chuckling in this video because it's so funny when we really start to take this bird's eye view of what is actually going on here. But like manifesting, for example, we're taught to surrender so that what is meant to come through will come through. It's not surrender. That is like doing an action of surrender for an outcome. That is like the opposite of surrender. But in this moment, Jonathan said he was out of everything. He even owns that I was out of grace. He was out of like faith, actually. And the interesting part is when we feel like we're out of faith and we get to this back against the wall moment, is actually we have the most faith. It's the false faith that we're out of. The faith in ourself, essentially. The faith in the little s self. The one that is an individual in this illusion that must operate and function on its own. That is the faith he really ran out of. That is the grace he had no more of. And he had to realize, and granted, a lot of this happens subconsciously because my understanding of Jonathan is that he's very much a devoted man of God and Jesus, and, is religious and identifies with Christianity, I believe. So by no means is he someone who's coming into this moment believing he never had faith, moving from, say, like atheism to having faith in God and Jesus. And I think often, again, I think that's why a lot of shame and guilt is created when we're a part of religion or other spirituality practices that aren't like aligning with us in our truth, because we do the footwork, But it's not about the footwork. It's not about what it looks like at the level of form. It's about what it looks like at the level of content. And that's why when he finally is out of grace and faith for self, little s, he goes to the one that actually is always there, and that's the big S, the collective S that is God, the awareness of God, the eternal love. And God's will is your only true will. You are constantly trying to create these other wills for yourself, the little s, and that's why we always become disappointed, because that is not a true will. That is all false. And the moment Jonathan surrendered to the true will of God and just was like, here I am. I've tried it all. I have nothing left to try. That's when the doors open. That's when the floods come in of miracles and just this massive connection to the will of God. That's what the will of God is for you to be in that holy instant where you are fully connected to the love of God. But you can only get to that place by removing all of the barriers. And a lot of the barriers are your faith in yourself. Little less. The faith that you can be independent and do this on your own. And you know, Jonathan's story, gosh, it's just so close to my heart because I have such a similar story and such a similar video to him in a manner. It's like, whoa, am I looking in the mirror? Except he looks a little different than me. But ultimately, we're the same. So it's so beautiful to see that this representation played out for the masses, because it's such a massive, impactful moment to watch someone's moment of surrender, especially someone who later plays Jesus. You would think he never cussed out God. I would think he never did. I would think he never yelled at God. I would think he's just been like this perfect individual all of his life. So then now he's perfect like when he plays Jesus, right? Or maybe that's just all my funny misconception. But ultimately, he shows like, no, I took this journey as well. And the beauty is, so afterwards, he turns on his video camera later because he comes home after this like moment of complete surrender to God's will and the complete surrender and handing over to Spirit and to Jesus, right? That's funny, like Jesus handing over to Jesus, but it's Jonathan. Of what he's ready, he like has tried all of his aces in the pocket. He has no more cards left to play. And then he's finally like, here it is. And he leaves it at the altar. Well, Holy Spirit removes that from the altar very quickly and moves quickly in what we believe of time and space in the cosmos, because by the time he comes home that day, mind you, he has just enough food left to eat for that day. He comes home and there's 4 checks in the mail of jobs he hasn't been paid for. And sure enough, he turns on his video camera and he's opening each check one after the other. The first one's $50, then it's $200, then it's another $50, and then it's $800. All these checks add up to $1,100, which to me, I love my winks. I would be like, oh, that's a wink, like you surrendered. That's a wink that you laid out for yourself. But that's neither here nor there. And he's just at this place of like, wow, I finally, God has brought me through the desert and now I have come out. But what I hope he's able to see is that he always could have left the desert. Oh man, we always can leave the desert. We got to get out of our own way. Like Jacob Collier says, his only job here is to clear the way for his highest self, spirit, whatever the heck you want to call it, to come through. And that's what Jonathan did in that moment. And then we see this hyperspeed, right? He says then like a week or two later, another $1,100 comes in. And then literally 3 months later, which another like 3, my favorite number, wink for me, he lands the chosen. But if Jonathan would have continued to try his own cards, his own way of faith and grace and believing what he needs to do, and never would have left his I know mind to the side, would he have found his way to Jesus? Would he have found his way to the chosen and the job of Jesus? No, but the cool thing is the script is already written, so this was going to happen the whole time. He just had to experience it. But how often do we feel that the desert is necessary? How often are we told the desert is necessary? Those moments of like, I have nothing. And yeah, Jonathan immediately came home and had the $1,100 there. Does that mean when you surrender, that's exactly what will happen? No. What's going to happen is exactly what needs to happen for your journey to unfold exactly as it is meant to. And that is where, with the manifesting and really manipulating the projection, we've really gotten stuck. We've gotten stuck on this belief that when I surrender, the form should look different. And that's not always the case. But we obviously highlight the moments that are, right? Like that's why we put in this video, Jonathan's level of form, huge shift, because we think that's how God works. That's not. Right? Yes, the form changes sometimes, but we cannot put all of our eggs in the basket of form changing, because we will be disappointed every time, because form is a projection in the ego illusion of what's going on in the mind. So ultimately, gosh, what a beautiful moment for Jonathan to then be able to start to truly step into the role he plays today. And I'll be honest, guys, when I think of Jesus, I now my picture is Jonathan. And maybe this is exactly what we needed in this illusion at this moment, to have this beautiful representation of the Jesus, right? Jesus in A Course in Miracles is the same as the Jesus in the Bible is the same. Jesus is this representation of man, of what is possible. It is like the light. It's like Jesus's life is like the guide for dummies. You know, those quick guides they used to make. And it's our guide that if we follow, he's the way, the light, or whatever that statement is. I'm awful with statements, you guys, but that's the truth. And in order for Jonathan to truly be able to portray this Jesus, he couldn't have been continuing to run the show. And he said, since that moment, I approach life so differently. Exactly, right? Because if he was still approaching it the way that Jonathan for 20 years was, sitting in the desert, that wouldn't portray very well as Jesus on screen. Because Jesus always knew that he wasn't going to waste his time in the desert, because it wasn't necessary. And there's no such thing as wasting time, but there's also such thing as sitting and looking through the looking glass of the ego when it is unnecessary. And so Jonathan truly had to experience that moment, I believe, and I think we all do, and we all have the opportunity to, but it's true surrender, and that takes sometimes these moments of complete pain and suffering, which sucks because it doesn't have to. I have a friend the other day, and she's waiting for the shoe to drop because she's waiting for her moment, right? Her pivotal moment, the moment where she hits rock bottom. And we have glorified what rock bottom looks like. I mean, even this with Jonathan could be considered like a glorification that we all believe we now need to get to that point. And that is one of the points she believes she needs to get to, is like this complete negative bank account or massive physical ailments in order to be ready to move on, when that is not the case. At any given moment, you can fully surrender to the will of God, which is to remember his love and to really be in that moment of the holy instant. And that's what Jonathan did. And now he's really just in this complete surrender. He's in his Jacob. My friend Kay, she says, I'm in my Jacob, Jacob's in his Jesus. And, maybe actually Jonathan's in his Jesus. I think this moment of all of these witnesses coming forth are witnesses of the mind. And it's this beautiful representation of how the mind is healing and how we're seeing all these beautiful representations of truth being projected into the illusion, like Jacob and Jonathan, and the chosen and the creation of that and this beautiful representation of Jesus. And that is a video for another story, or that is a video for another day. Ultimately, this series through Amazon of Jonathan and Jesus is an absolutely beautiful representation of just his journey and how it is so similar to all of our journeys. And what it reminds me of is he really represents Jesus today. In many people's minds, you see they go up to him crying and asking him to pray and, really see him as the physical form of Jesus resurrect, or Jesus' second coming, or whatever. And so I think this show reminds me that even though I see him now, sometimes when I think of Jesus, I see the picture of him, just because that's how my brain works, that he's just like me, right? He's just like you. And that was the same for the message with actual Jesus. The Jesus that came over 2,000 years ago was like, he was gone through all this as well. He's gone through these moments of surrender. He's gone through these moments of allowing the darkness to bubble up and be freed. That is how he was able to overcome the cross. That is how he was resurrected, because in fact, he was on the same journey we are all on. He just happened to figure it out before us. And that's what we get to see with Jonathan, is we are all on our journey of being in our Jesus. And we see this just so beautifully played out. Oh my gosh. What a beautiful trip today with Jonathan, aka the representation of Jesus in our world today. All things surrender, and all things of really getting to witness how this symbol of Jesus today actually goes through the same stinking things we do, and that really Jesus 2,000 years ago did as well. So thank you so much, my friend, for tuning in. Please share below your moments of surrender, and have you been believing that you've been surrendering, but you've truly still had the faith in little self, the faith and the grace in your little self that you needed to figure it out, when truly it's really about you don't know. You just follow those little nudges and you allow it to unfold, and you work every day to unwind, to truly have God's will for you, which is to remember his love, to be in that holy instant with him, fully in alignment. So much love. As always, make sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, share any upcoming videos you would like to see, and most importantly, my friend, remember you are worth it. So much love. Bye-bye.